What are some similarities and differences between your parents' parenting styles? You know how your parents raised you because you were there.
Yeah.
What were some similarities and differences between your parenting style and your parents?
So my mom was a little more freer about discipline and about like she was very much about education and about learning from your mistakes, for example. And she was not strict, but she was like you knew if you upset your mom because you did something crazy stupid, like okay, all right, I shouldn't do that. That's kind of how you learn that. My dad was a more strict disciplinarian, but mostly because he'd gotten frustrated and it had gone off the deep end at that point. So my dad really held back on the discipline when we were small children, probably because of his upbringing with him getting beat all the time. He didn't want to do that to us, so he did break that cycle. I want to give him credit for breaking that cycle of abuse.
Okay. Okay.
It just didn't manifest itself until much later. Right?
Okay.
So the difference in the styles then. So my parents were kind of pretty even-handed about everything, and we knew what was right and wrong. We were raised, with values and that kind of stuff. But my wife and I, my late wife and I, raised our three children in a probably more strict household than I was raised.
Okay.
A lot more discipline. My late wife was very much about making sure the kids did stuff the way she wanted to do them. She was a little bit controlling, and she was a little bit authoritarian, and that's how she was, and that's okay, right? It's all good. I think she did a phenomenal job raising the children. We had to decide when my second child was born which one of us was going to stay home and raise the kids and which one of us was going to go to work. And the way we made the decision was whoever makes the most money will keep working, and whoever has a lower salary will give up their job and stay home. And at the time, my wife was making more money than I was, which I was okay with staying home. I was a little nervous about it, but I was okay with it. But then I got a very large raise at work, and so I decided to keep working, and she stayed home with the kids. From the time my daughter was born, she was a stay-at-home mom for the next 15 years, basically.
So how long were you a stay-at-home dad?
I never really was. I mean, I got that raise before my daughter was born. We were still having that conversation.
Oh, okay.
Because the cost for daycare at that time would have been so high, it would have wiped out her whole salary. There would have been no point in her working.
Okay, got it. So I would be remiss. I know you mentioned 1967. That is when you guys moved to Oxon Hill from D.C.?
So we had lived. At the time we were living in the eastern shore of Maryland. So
Okay.
it's the southeastern part of Maryland on the Delmarva Peninsula.
Okay.
A little tiny town called Pocomoke City, and we moved from there to the suburbs of Washington D.C.
So in the late 60s, excuse me, in the early 70s, I would be remiss if I don't ask you these questions. You obviously grow up in a white household. You're a white family. And Washington, D.C. back then, and even still today, is heavily African American and white mixed. That is the height of the civil rights era. What was that like? What did your parents teach you? Like as all the civil rights activity was going on, what was it like outside with your friends? How did your sisters take it? Like, what was it like overall in your house? Like experiencing all that, like live in the middle of it.
In the moment, right?
Right.
While we're watching it on the news on TV, for example, we're reading about it in the news.
Something that's like 10 minutes away.
Right. So we moved there in '67, and in 1968, when Martin Luther King was killed in April 1968, D.C., along with a lot of other cities, erupted in violence. And we could see the smoke from the riots that were taking place in part of Washington, D.C. from where we lived, because D.C. is surrounded by hills, basically, and so you can kind of look down and see it. So if you go up on a high place and look toward Washington, D.C., you can see the smoke on the horizon. So I asked my mom, I'm like, what's that smoke? And she goes, oh, there's unrest in the city, and she would talk about that. I said, why is there unrest? Well, people are very mad because Dr. King was killed. And it's like, well, who's Dr. King? And she's like, well, he's a civil rights leader. It's like, well, what's civil rights? And so my mom would very patiently explain to us all our questions. She'd answer every question we had about every single thing we possibly could, that we could know about, right? And so it's interesting because I think it was in '68. So he was killed in April of '68, and later on that year, they were going to have a 5-year commemoration of his 1963 speech, I Have a Dream speech, that was given on the Mall in Washington, D.C. And I'd always seen pictures of it, but I was just a baby, so I don't remember it.
Okay.
So they had this event called the Poor People's March. and they were going to have that march, and it was like, I don't know, hundreds of thousands of people, and my mom took us all to that.
Really?
Yes. She put us on the bus, and she made some sandwiches and put them in the brown paper bags, and we got on the bus and we rode downtown, and we got out, and we were there with all the people, and we got to see masses and masses of people gathering together to honor Dr. King, for one thing, and to gather together for people to speak about their economic conditions. That's why it was called the Poor People's March. It was about people who were economically disadvantaged.
Okay.
And when you're a kid growing up and you're poor yourself, you don't really know it until you see something that's different than what you know. That's when you start to know, right? So we went there and we saw all kinds of people, every color, every size, every shape. I saw a Native American in a full Native American headdress,
Okay.
like feathers on a bonnet, on a war bonnet, all the way down to the ground. And I could tell by looking at him that he was the real deal. He was authentic.
You had never seen that before?
I had never seen, other than a picture in a book, I had never seen a Native American. Live,
okay.
right in front of me. And our neighborhood was mixed racially, but it was mostly white.
Okay.
And so every once in a while, you'd see kids of different colors. So there was a kid who lived down the street whose family was from Puerto Rico, so he had slightly darker skin, like olive skin.
Okay.
There was a couple kids in our school that were black kids.
Okay.
And so we didn't really think much about it, to be honest with you. It wasn't like
It wasn't a racial thing between the kids ever.
Well, I wouldn't say ever. So I wouldn't say that. In the 60s and 70s in Washington, D.C., there was a lot of racial stuff between a lot of groups of kids.
Okay.
And it just wasn't, like, as an adult, you look back on it, you're like, yeah, that totally wasn't cool. But when you're a kid and you're part of this thing, you really don't know.
Okay.
Like, you just don't know. So there were kids from a neighborhood nearby, for example, and we were like, oh, those kids are from that neighborhood and we're from this neighborhood, that kind of thing. You know what I mean?
Right.
It wasn't so much,
it was neighborhoodish.
It was neighborhoodish. It wasn't so much color as it was like socioeconomic levels and stuff. Like kids from that neighborhood over there, you knew they didn't have any money, and we didn't have any money either, but we didn't know it. Like we felt like we had some money. You know what I mean? Like we had a roof over our head and we had meals and stuff like that.
So you mentioned that your mom took you to the Poor People's March. Mm-hmm. Your mom clearly did not teach you to hate.
Clearly she did not.
Okay. Your dad didn't go?
No.
Okay. What was your dad's stance on civil rights?
So that's a great question. I love that. It's hard for me to really know, but I'll tell you what I do know. So he grew up in rural North Carolina, in western North Carolina.
Okay.
And so that's Appalachia, right? And the folks there don't see anybody but white people for like their whole entire life.
Okay.
Because it's really poor and it's really rural. My grandfather's job, the reason my dad grew up there is because his job was to bring electricity to the region. They didn't even have electricity in their houses.
Really?
Mm-mm.
Okay.
So the TVA, Tennessee Valley Authority, put in some dams and dammed up some rivers and made hydroelectric plants in the 1930s. And that's when they began putting electricity into these rural homes for the first time. So people had never seen or used electricity in their entire life.
Okay.
And they'd lived there for hundreds of years. So this is like really backwater, right?
Right.
Not like a city that's been electrified since the late 1800s, right? So that was my grandfather's job. So my dad grew up in that area. So his I think, and living in Washington D.C., I don't think my dad was overtly racist. He didn't like use the N-word, and he wasn't like an out front in your face kind of a racist, but he would make disparaging remarks about people of color, and so I heard that growing up. And you always kind of ask yourself, you're like, why, right? Why would you do that? Like, what's the difference, And so I think a lot of people around us would stir up racial tensions between the kids in school and the kids in the neighborhood, and you really are getting it from older people. You're not getting it from yourselves. Like, how would you as a kid even know?
Right.
Right? You wouldn't know. So I think it was a lot of just kind of hearing it from your parents, right? So my dad, I don't know how to describe him. I wouldn't say he's like out there, spewing hate, but I don't think he looked at people as being equals either.
So there's a difference between, in my opinion, being racist and being prejudiced, right?
Yes.
Right?
Absolutely.
Racism is like you hate another group because of who they are.
Or you feel that the race that you are is somehow superior to other races.
Correct.
That to me is racism.
Now,
But
prejudice.
everybody has a prejudice of one thing or another.
Right. Maybe I like tall women. You like short women. I like big girls. You like skinny girls. I like,
Exactly.
Right.
Prejudice is often a preference expressed in a strong way, perhaps, right?
Right.
Or you would avoid something because you're prejudiced against it. And prejudice is not too far. I mean, it can be associated with racism. It can be part of racism.
Right.
But I think that everybody has a prejudgment or a preference for something, as opposed to actual systemic racism that's built into the society. That's a little different.
So with that being said, nothing was actually forced on you. You got the best of both worlds between your mother and your father, and you kind of made your own decisions.
And we had to learn, yes, and we had to learn as we went, right? So we had to have our own experiences and then learn from those experiences.
Okay. I bet you don't remember all the schools you went to growing up.
I remember every one.
All right, preschool, go.
Okay, preschool, I don't remember the name of the school, actually. That was in Pocomoke City, down in the Eastern Shore of Maryland.
Okay.
But I remember my kindergarten, I guess my first grade class going up, right? So I remember all that. So that was, first grade was Flintstone Elementary School.
Okay. Flintstone Elementary. And was that in Forest Heights or Birchwood City?
That was in Forest Heights.
In Forest Heights.
Yeah.
Okay. You lived in Birchwood City and you go to Flintstone in Forest Heights. Did you walk to school? Did you catch the bus? How did that work?
So in my whole entire life, I never once rode the bus to school.
Ever?
Ever.
Okay.
I could have, but I never did. We'll get to that story later.
So that means you walked.
I walked until I
Okay.
drove.
How far a walk was the walk from your house to Flintstone?
Right. So my neighborhood, Birchwood City, was divided into two, and the upper half of the neighborhood went to a different elementary school. They went to Valley View.
Okay.
The lower half of the neighborhood where I lived went to the elementary school over in Forest Heights, where all my friends lived. Right.
What did you guys call it? Did you guys have names for the upper half and the lower half?
No, it was all just Birchwood City, but it was like Valley View kids and Flintstone kids.
Oh, okay.
Right?
Got
Like,
it, got it.
where do you
got
go
it.
to school? Oh, I go to Valley View. Oh, I go to Flintstone. That's
So
how
you instantly
knew.
know where people live.
Right. If you said what school you went to, you would know where people lived.
Okay.
Right.
Got it, got it.
So it was about I'd say like about a 20-minute walk. It's hard to remember as a kid, like
Right,
how far you go. But
right.
I think it's about 20 minutes if you walked and like 10 minutes if you rode your bike.
So you could be walking one direction while a bunch of other kids walking the other direction to school? Like, do you cross each other?
No, because the upper half of the neighborhood would all go up to Valley View. Valley View was at the very back of the neighborhood.
Okay.
The lower half of the neighborhood would all walk down to Livingston Road. We had a crossing guard. She would cross us across Livingston Road because it had traffic on it, and then we would walk through the neighborhood of Forest Heights to get to get up to the Flintstone.
Got it, got it, got
And
it.
people always made fun of the name. I mean, everybody like
Right,
Fred
right,
Flintstone,
Did you ever have any problems with in Forest Hill? Was it Forest Heights? Did you ever have any situations with the Forest Heights kids, or were you just cool with them?
I was cool with all of them, unless I got myself in trouble.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So you were there at Flintstone from first grade through what?
To 6.
Okay, so it went all the way to 6th grade.
Mm-hmm.
Overall, how was your Flintstone experience?
It was marvelous.
Okay.
I mean, I loved it there. I had a lot of friends. I had good teachers. I learned a lot. It was a good time. The lower grades played kickball, grades 1 through 3,
Okay.
and then the upper grades 4, 5, and 6 got to play soccer at recess. We all hung out together. It was a good time.
Okay. Okay. So you graduate from Flintstone and you go where?
To John Hanson Junior High School.
Okay.
So in Maryland, in those days, in that part of Maryland, you had a junior high school, which was grades 7, 8, and 9. So your first year of high school was actually in the junior high school building.
Oh, okay. Got it. And by the way, so back then you guys didn't call it middle school. It was junior high.
No, we thought middle school was a weird thing that other places and other states had.
Right.
We didn't have that.
Okay. How was your junior high school experience?
My junior high school experience was also marvelous. It was a really good time for me. It was a good time for me to learn a little bit more about who I am. You have your first girlfriend. You start getting into other hobbies that are different than what your other friends might have, for example.
Like what? What were your hobbies?
Well, so like I like to read, so I still read all the time.
Okay.
I like to go outdoors and ride my bike and hang out with my friends and do all that kind of stuff. And the stuff I talked about earlier, like doing stuff with my dad. But when I was in junior high school, my 7th grade year, I signed up for something called band. Actually, I had been playing the clarinet in elementary school. I started in 4th grade in elementary school.
Okay.
And I played the clarinet. And so when I joined the band in 7th grade at junior high school, they had a much bigger symphonic band, a lot more kids. It wasn't just 5 kids in a room with a teacher. It was like, a whole room, and you had a whole period dedicated to it.
Okay.
And so you got to meet all these other kids who played music.
Okay.
And that was like really eye-opening to me. It's like to hear a whole symphonic band be able to play like a piece of music together. You're
Right.
like, oh, okay, this is not like three kids with a clarinet and a trumpet. You know what I mean? So it was different. It was good.
Okay.
That was a good experience.
Now, I would be remiss again if I skip over something. You had your first girlfriend in junior high?
I did.
Give her a shout out. What was her name?
Her name was Angela.
Angela. Shout out to Angela.
Yeah.
Okay. You said you loved school, like period.
I did.
You love reading, you love science, you love history, you love math, you love English. Every subject.
I did.
Was there a subject you didn't like?
Gym.
Ah!
Look at me, Khalid. I'm not athletic.
Jim doesn't like gym.
Jim doesn't like Jim because Jim was nearsighted, Jim wore glasses, Jim was uncoordinated and not good at sports.
Okay.
So naturally, I'm not going to like Jim.
Got it.
Yeah.
And you said you were on a wrestling team.
I was on the wrestling team 1 year in 9th grade, and our team went to the county championships.
What weight class were you?
I was 96 to 100.
Okay. Okay. Interesting. Now you only wrestled for 1 year. Why? Oh, because... Wait. If you don't like sports, how did you get on the wrestling team?
One of my friends was on the team, and he's like, hey, you should come out for wrestling. You might be good at it.
Okay.
Right? And so it turns out that the conditioning to get into shape for wrestling
is bananas.
Is really good conditioning. So I was in the best
Right.
shape of my whole, junior high school life by doing all that training.
A lot of running, a lot of stairs.
Yeah, well, we did all of our workouts. Although unless we do running around outside, we did all of our workouts in the room. So a lot of push-ups, a lot of spin drills.
Spin drills.
Oh. But you get in really good shape, and you learn a skill, and you learn how to contend, right? You learn how to contend with somebody physically.
Okay.
So
10th grade.
Mm-hmm.
So you graduate from John Hanson.
Right.
And 10th grade comes. In 10th grade, most kids are 15.
Correct.
So here it is about to come full circle. You said you lived with your parents up until you were 15.
Correct.
So the next question I typically ask is, did you live with either your mom or your dad?
Neither.
So did you run away from home?
So the story I tell people to make it short and easy for people to understand